The Grand Hall of Valora Prime stretched higher than any cathedral on Earth. Its walls shimmered with light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Princess Hana sat on the raised platform, her blue skin catching the strange light, making her look like something carved from sapphire. She wore the formal robes of her station, heavy with the weight of tradition and expectation. Around her, dozens of alien species filled the massive chamber, their voices creating a symphony of clicks, hums, and words and languages she had spent years learning. This was supposed to be her greatest achievement. Her father had died only 3 months ago, and now she stood as the heir to an empire that spanned 40 star systems. Today's summit would bring peace between the Valoran Empire and the neighboring coalitions that had fought bitter wars for generations. If she succeeded, billions of lives would be saved. If she failed, those same billions would die in the conflicts to come. Hana listened to the Crowan ambassador argue about trade routes, her mind only half-focused. She had heard the same arguments for weeks now. Every species wanted something, and every concession felt like giving away pieces of her empire. Her advisor, Minister Daiho, stood beside her throne, his gray skin wrinkled with age and wisdom. He leaned close and whispered that the Terrans would arrive soon. The Terrans, humans, the newest species to join galactic civilization, discovered only 2 years ago on a small blue planet they called Earth. Most of the galaxy viewed them as curiosities, primitives who had somehow stumbled into faster-than-light travel without destroying themselves first. They had been invited as observers only, a courtesy extended to new species. Hana expected little from them. The massive doors at the far end of the Grand Hall began to open. The sound echoed through the chamber, and conversations died as everyone turned to look. First came the Terran ambassador, a woman named Yuna with dark hair pulled back severely. She walked with the careful grace of someone navigating unfamiliar territory. Behind her came the security detail. That was when Hana saw him. The Terran soldier entered the Grand Hall, and something in Hana's chest tightened. He was not particularly tall compared to many species present, but he moved with a precision that caught her eye. His uniform was simple, dark blue, with strange insignia she did not recognize. His face was young but weathered, with eyes that swept the room in constant motion, cataloging threats, exits, and positions. Those eyes were dark, almost black, and they held something Hana had rarely seen in soldiers. Intelligence paired with readiness. She found herself leaning forward slightly, studying him. His skin was a warm brown, darker than any Valoran's. His black hair was cut short, military style. There was a scar along his jawline, barely visible. He carried no obvious weapon, but his hands hung loose at his sides in a way that suggested he could move very quickly if needed. The other Terrans in the security detail were competent. She could see that, but this one was different. This one had seen real combat. Minister Daiho was speaking to her about the schedule, but Hana barely heard him. She watched the Terran soldier take up position near the wall, his back straight, his expression neutral, professional, disciplined. But there was something else. Something in the set of his shoulders that spoke of burden carried long and without complaint. The summit continued. Ambassadors spoke. Hana responded with the words she had practiced, offering compromises her advisors had crafted. But her attention kept drifting to the Terran soldier. Once, their eyes met across the vast hall, and she felt a jolt like static electricity. He looked away immediately, professional, appropriate. But for that brief moment, she had seen something in those dark eyes. Not recognition exactly, but awareness. He knew she had been watching him an hour past. Then another. The negotiations were going well, better than expected. The Crowan ambassador agreed to the disputed trade route. The Silicon delegation accepted new mining rights. Peace seemed possible, close enough to touch. That was when the first explosion ripped through the eastern wall. The Grand Hall erupted into chaos. Delegates screamed in dozens of languages. Security forces from every species drew weapons. Hana stood frozen for a heartbeat, her mind unable to process what was happening. Then Minister Deho grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the emergency exit behind the throne. 3 figures in black armor dropped through the hole in the wall, weapons firing. They moved with the jerky, fanatical energy of true believers. Anti-peace extremists, Hana realized. The faction that had threatened violence if she pursued this summit. They were shooting at delegates, at guards, at anyone between them and their target. They were shooting at her. Hana saw the weapons turn in her direction, saw the energy building in the barrels, saw her death coming across the 100 feet of marble floor between them. Then the Terran soldier was there. She did not see him move. One moment he was against the wall, the next he was in front of her, his body between her and the attackers. His hand caught her shoulder and drove her down behind the throne, just as energy blasts scorched the air where her head had been. The smell of ozone and burnt metal filled her nose. The soldier moved like water, like lightning. His hand struck the first attacker's throat with surgical precision. The assassin dropped, gasping. The second attacker turned his weapon toward the Terran, but the soldier was already moving, impossibly fast, closing the distance before the weapon could track him. A brutal strike to the wrist sent the gun clattering away. An elbow to the face dropped the second attacker. The third assassin was smarter. He kept his distance, firing from cover. The Terran grabbed Hana and Minister Deho, practically throwing them behind a stone pillar as energy blasts shattered marble around them. Other security forces were responding now, but they moved slower, hesitant. Trained for formal protection rather than close combat, the Terran soldier glanced at Hana, and in his eyes she saw not fear but calculation. He said something in his own language, probably a curse, then smiled. Actually smiled. Then he moved again, using the confusion and smoke, getting behind the third assassin in seconds. The fight was over before Hana could fully understand what she was seeing. When the smoke cleared, all 3 attackers were subdued. Security forces swarmed the area. Medical teams rushed to treat the wounded. The summit was over, chaos replacing careful diplomacy. But Hana barely noticed any of it. She stood slowly, her legs shaking, and looked at the Terran soldier. He was checking the restraints on one of the attackers, all business, as if throwing himself between a princess and certain death was just another day's work. Minister Deho was asking if she was hurt. Ambassador Yuna was apologizing profusely. But Hana only had eyes for the soldier who had saved her life without hesitation. This human from a world the galaxy considered primitive. She wanted to know his name. She wanted to know everything about him. She wanted to understand how someone could move like that, fight like that, and still have kind eyes. The feeling in her chest was not gratitude, she realized. It was something far more dangerous. Something that would change everything. 3 days after the attack, Hana finally learned his name. Corporal G1 of the Terran Marine Corps, aged 26 standard Earth years, decorated for valor during something called the Pacific Consolidation Campaign. The file her intelligence service provided was thin. Humans guarded their military records carefully, and Earth was still new to galactic politics. But she read what little information existed over and over, memorizing details that should not matter to an empress. Minister Deho advised against meeting the soldier personally. It was beneath her station, he said. A formal commendation ceremony would suffice, perhaps a medal awarded through proper channels. The old advisor's silver eyes watched her carefully as he spoke, seeing too much as always. Hana ignored the advice. She was not her father, bound by every tradition and custom. She arranged a private meeting in the palace gardens, a place where the walls had no ears and security was discreet. When Ji-won arrived, escorted by his captain, a stern woman named Minji, Hana saw him clearly for the first time without chaos surrounding them. He was shorter than her by several inches, compact and efficient in build. His dress uniform was crisp, decorated with ribbons and insignia that meant nothing to her, but clearly meant something to his people. When he bowed, it was the Earth military salute rather than the Valoran custom, and somehow that pleased her. He was not pretending to be something he was not. "Princess Hana," he said in passable Valoran, his accent thick but understandable. "It is my honor." "Please sit," she said, gesturing to the stone bench beneath a flowering tree that grew crystalline blooms. "I wanted to thank you personally for saving my life." Ji-won sat when she did, maintaining proper distance. "I was doing my duty, Your Highness." Any Marine would have done the same, would they? Hana studied his face, looking for false humility, but finding only honesty. "You moved faster than I thought possible. You fought 3 armed attackers without weapons of your own. That seems beyond normal duty." For the first time, Ji-won smiled slightly. "Terran Marines train hard. We have to. Earth is not like your world, Princess. We had no advantage when we joined the galaxy. No ancient technology, no inherited knowledge. Just ourselves." That opened the conversation Hana truly wanted. She asked about Earth, and Ji-won spoke carefully at first, then with growing ease. He described a blue and green world recovering from near destruction. Nuclear wars that scarred continents. Climate collapse that drowned cities. Biological weapons that killed millions. But also the stubborn refusal to give up. The slow rebuilding. The moment when humanity looked up at the stars and decided they would reach them or die trying. "We almost did die," Ji-won said quietly. "There was a moment, maybe 50 years ago, when everyone thought we were finished. Too much damage, too little time. But we had already sent probes into deep space. One of them found the first alien signal. When we learned we were not alone, it changed everything. Gave us purpose." Hana listened, fascinated. The Valoran Empire had existed for 10,000 years. Her people had never known true desperation, never faced extinction. They had always been powerful, always been secure. Listening to Ji-won describe Earth's struggle made her own problems seem small by comparison. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "Your world?" Ji-won looked up at Valora Prime's strange orange sky. "Every day. But I volunteered for this mission. Someone has to represent humanity out here. Show the galaxy we are worth knowing." "You have done that already," Hana said softly. "At least for me." Something passed between them then, a connection that had nothing to do with politics or diplomacy. Ji-won looked away first, professional training reasserting itself. "Your Highness, I should return to my duties." But Hana was not ready to let him go. Over Minister Daeho's strong objections, she appointed Ji-won as her personal guard for the duration of the Terran delegation's stay. It was highly irregular, but as she reminded her advisor, she was the heir to the Empire. She could be irregular if she wished. The appointment caused immediate controversy. Conservative factions within the Valoran government leaked stories to the media about the primitive human being elevated above qualified Valoran guards. Captain Minji pulled Ji-won aside for a tense conversation that Hana was not supposed to overhear, but did anyway. The captain warned him about getting involved in alien politics, about maintaining professional distance, about remembering his duty to Earth above all else. Ji-won gave his word to be careful. But careful became difficult when he was with Hana every day. They fell into a routine. Mornings, Ji-won accompanied her to meetings with ministers and diplomats, standing silent and watchful. Afternoons, when her schedule allowed, they walked in the gardens and talked. Hana learned about Earth customs, about things called coffee and rain and ocean waves. Ji-won had grown up near water in a place called Bizen that had survived the wars. He described the sound of waves against stone, the smell of salt air, the feeling of sand between toes. In return, Hana told him about Valora, about the loneliness of imperial duty, about being raised from birth to rule, about never having friends who were truly friends rather than political connections. She told him about her father, a good emperor but a distant parent, who had prepared her for everything except how empty the throne could feel. On Earth, Ji-won said one afternoon, we have a saying, heavy is the head that wears the crown. Hana laughed, the sound surprising them both. We have the same saying here. Different words, same meaning. Perhaps humans and Valorans are not so different. Perhaps not, Ji-won agreed, and when their eyes met this time, neither looked away quickly. The political situation worsened daily. Conservative factions, led by High Chancellor Soo-hyun, used the failed assassination attempt to argue against peace treaties. They painted humans as dangerous influences, primitive warriors corrupting Valoran tradition. Propaganda broadcasts showed edited footage of the Grand Hall attack, emphasizing the violence of Ji-won's response rather than the lives he saved. Minister Daeho warned Hana that her relationship with the Terran soldier, however innocent, was being used against her. Every moment they spent together gave ammunition to her enemies. The sensible thing would be to send Ji-won back to the Terran delegation, to distance herself from the controversy. Hana refused. She was tired of being sensible, tired of letting political calculation determine every aspect of her life. For the first time since her father's death, she felt something other than duty. When she was with Ji-won, she felt alive. One evening, walking through the gardens as the sun set, John asked her why she had really appointed him as her guard. Hana stopped walking. The crystalline flowers around them chimed softly in the breeze. She could lie, maintain the political fiction. Or she could tell the truth. Because I wanted to understand you, she said. When you stepped in front of those weapons, you did not hesitate. You did not calculate the political cost or worry about your career. You just acted because it was right. I have never met anyone like that. Ji-won was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Princess, I need to tell you something. Captain Minji has ordered me back to the Terran embassy. She says my presence here is causing problems for both our governments. Hana felt something cold settle in her chest. When do you leave? Tomorrow morning, I see. Hana turned away, not wanting him to see her face. She was a princess, nearly an empress. She did not cry over departing guards, but the tightness in her throat suggested otherwise. Princess. Ji-won's voice was soft. Hana. It was the first time he had used her name. She turned back and found him closer than protocol allowed. His dark eyes held something she had only hoped to see there. I do not want to go, he said simply. Then stay. It is not that simple. I have orders. I have duty. And I have power, Hana said. I could command you to stay. You could. But you would not do that to me. He was right, and they both knew it. Hana closed her eyes, steadying herself. When she opened them, she had made a decision that would change everything. Then I will give you a reason to stay that has nothing to do with commands, she said. I am going to prove that humanity deserves respect, that you deserve respect. I will ask Earth to help us end this extremist threat. I will make our governments partners. And I will do it because I believe in what you represent. She stepped closer, close enough to see the surprise in his eyes. And because I am falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between them. Ji-won did not speak. He simply reached out and took her hand, his warm fingers wrapping around her cooler ones. Tomorrow would bring consequences. Tonight, they had this moment in a garden that smelled of crystal flowers. Two people from different worlds, finding something neither had expected. The attacks began at dawn. Explosions ripped through the palace district. Coordinated strikes targeting government buildings, diplomatic quarters, and transportation hubs. The extremists had clearly been planning this for months, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They wanted to prove that peace was impossible, that the empire needed strong leadership willing to crush its enemies rather than negotiate with them. Hannah was in the command center when the first reports came in. Minister Deho stood beside her, coordinating the Valoran Guard's response. On the screens around them, fire and smoke bloomed across the city. Casualties were already in the hundreds, climbing every minute. "Where is the Terran delegation?" Hannah demanded. "Their embassy is under heavy attack," an officer reported. "Multiple assault teams. The building is surrounded." Hannah's blood went cold. Jiwan was there. Captain Minji had taken him back yesterday as ordered, and now he was trapped in a war zone. She started to give orders to send reinforcements, but Minister Daiho caught her arm. "The Valoran Guard has its hands full," he said quietly. "We cannot spare troops for the embassy." "Not yet. Then the Terrans will die." "Perhaps," Daiho said. "Or perhaps they will show us what they are truly capable of." On the screens, the camera drone shifted to show the Terran embassy. The building was modern, built to human specifications rather than Valoran design. It stood 4 stories tall, surrounded by gardens that were now torn apart by explosions. At least 50 extremist fighters had it surrounded, firing energy weapons and rockets at the walls. But the walls held. And the Terrans fired back. Hannah watched in amazement as the human marines turned the embassy into a fortress. They moved with practiced efficiency, each soldier knowing exactly what to do without needing orders. Windows became firing positions. Gardens became kill zones. The Terrans used weapons that seemed primitive compared to energy rifles, but they were devastatingly effective. Bullets, they were called. Simple projectiles driven by chemical explosions, but in trained hands they were precise and deadly. G1 appeared on one of the screens, directing fire from the roof. He held a rifle that looked like it had been through several wars, moving from position to position, shooting with impossible accuracy. An extremist would rise to fire, and G1's weapon would bark once, and the target would drop. Every shot counted. No wasted ammunition. How are they doing this? An officer whispered. "They are outnumbered 5-1. They are human," Hannah said, understanding flooding through her. "They are from Earth." The battle continued. Hours passed. The extremists threw everything they had at the embassy. They tried direct assaults, only to be cut down by coordinated fire. They tried rockets, only to have them intercepted or avoided. They tried to wait out the defenders, but the Terrans showed no sign of tiring. Hannah watched Jiwan fight for 8 hours straight. Then 10, then 12. She saw him take a hit that would have killed most species. An energy blast that scorched his shoulder, but he just wrapped it quickly and kept fighting. Beside him, other Marines showed the same impossible endurance. Private Hyan, a young woman who could not be older than 20, fought with the ferocity of a veteran. Sergeant Bowman, a massive man with scars covering his arms, held a position alone against a dozen attackers. The Valoran officers in the command center watched in silence. These were not the primitives the propaganda had described. These were warriors forged in crucibles most species had never imagined. At hour 15, the extremists tried one final assault. They rushed the embassy gates with everything they had, determined to overwhelm the defenders through sheer numbers. G1 was there, at the front, his rifle empty, fighting hand to hand with brutal efficiency. He moved like a machine, unstoppable, every strike precise and devastating. Then the walls of the embassy exploded outward. Not from an attack, but from the Terrans. They had been defending for 15 hours, and now they attacked. They poured out of the building in a coordinated assault, turning the tables on their attackers. The extremists, exhausted from their failed siege, broke and ran. It was over in minutes. The Terrans secured the perimeter, took prisoners, and began treating the wounded, both their own and the extremists. Hana watched Ji-won kneel beside an injured attacker, applying medical aid with the same care he would give an ally. The man had been trying to kill him moments ago, but Ji-won saved his life anyway. "Send medical teams to the Terran embassy," Hana ordered. "And tell Captain Minji that I am coming personally." Minister Daeho did not argue this time. Something had changed in the command center. The Valoran officers looked at the screens differently now, seeing the humans not as curiosities, but as something else. Something worthy of respect. Hana arrived at the embassy with a full medical convoy. The building was scarred but standing, its walls blackened by weapons fire. Bodies of extremists littered the grounds, while Terran Marines were setting up triage areas for the wounded. Captain Minji met her at the gate, covered in dust and blood, but unbowed. "Princess," the captain said, offering a tired salute. "Thank you for the medical support. Where's Ji-won?" Minji pointed to a corner of the garden where a group of Marines were resting. Ji-won sat with his back against the wall, his shoulder bandaged, his face exhausted but alert. He looked up as Hana approached, trying to stand, but she waved him down. "Stay seated, Corporal. You have earned the rest." Hana sat beside him, not caring about protocol or propriety. Around them, medical teams worked to save lives. The smell of smoke and ozone filled the air. But she only saw Ji-won, this soldier who had fought for 16 hours without surrender, who had shown her what humanity really meant. "I thought you were going to die," she said quietly. Ji-won smiled, exhausted. "We almost did. Several times. But we had a rule on Earth, during the bad years. Never surrender while you can still fight. And we can always fight. Why do you keep fighting? You could have negotiated with the extremists. They wanted the Terran delegation gone. You could have left and abandoned innocent people." Ji-won shook his head. "That is not who we are. Earth survived because we learned to stand together, to protect each other. We made terrible mistakes getting there. Fought each other, hurt each other. But we learned. We became better." He looked at her with those dark, honest eyes. "I fight because I know what happens when good people do nothing. I fight because someone has to stand between monsters and the innocent. And I fight because I believe that someday, humanity will be remembered not for our wars, but for our refusal to let evil win." Hana felt tears on her cheeks, not caring who saw. She reached out and took his hand, holding it tightly. Around them, Valoran and Terran medical teams worked side by side, saving lives together. In the command center, she knew, officers were seeing humans differently. The propaganda was crumbling against the reality of what these people could do. "The galaxy thinks we are primitive," Ji-won said softly. "Maybe we are. We do not have thousand-year-old empires or ancient technologies. But we have something else. We have the strength that comes from surviving the impossible. We have the courage that comes from staring into the darkness and choosing hope anyway." He squeezed her hand. "And we have learned that the only thing worth dying for is the chance to make tomorrow better than today." Hana kissed him then. There in the ruined garden with the smoke still rising and the wounded still crying out. She kissed him because he was right, because he was everything she had never known she needed, because he represented a future where strength and compassion were not opposites. When they parted, Captain Minji was watching with an expression that might have been approval. Minister Daeho had arrived at some point and was studying the scene with his calculating silver eyes. The political consequences would be severe. Hana did not care. "I love you," she told Ji-won, saying it clearly so everyone could hear. "I love what you are, what your people are. I love your strength and your kindness and your refusal to give up. Jiwan smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his face. I love you too. Even though this is probably going to cause a lot of problems. Definitely, Hana agreed. But I think we can handle problems. Around them, Earth and Valora began their first real partnership, born not in diplomacy but in shared struggle. It was messy and complicated and would cause political chaos for months to come, but it was real, and it was worth fighting for. The news spread across the empire within hours. Princess Hana, heir to the throne, in love with a human soldier. The images were everywhere. Hana and Jiwan in the ruined garden, holding hands, kissing while smoke still rose from the embassy. Conservative media outlets exploded with outrage. Liberal commentators defended her right to choose. The entire empire seemed to have an opinion, and most of them were shouted at maximum volume. High Chancellor Sudhyun called an emergency session of the Imperial Council. The next day, Hana attended with Minister Deho at her side, knowing what was coming but determined to face it. The council chamber was ancient, its walls carved with the names of every emperor and empress for 10,000 years. Hana's name would eventually join them, or would be forgotten. Today would decide which. Suyun was old, even for a Valaran, his skin almost white with age. But his voice was strong when he addressed the council. Princess Hana has violated every tradition of our empire. She has taken a human, a member of a species barely civilized, as her consort. This cannot stand. I have taken no one as my consort, Hana replied calmly. I have admitted my feelings for Corporal Jiwan. There is a difference. Feelings? So-Yoon's laugh was bitter. Empresses do not have the luxury of feelings. You were raised to know this. Your duty is to the empire, to the bloodline, to tradition, not to some alien warrior. The debate raged for hours. Counselors stood to speak for and against Hana. Some argued that love should matter, that a new empire required new thinking. Others insisted that tradition existed for good reason, that mixing with aliens would weaken the bloodline and the empire's stability. Finally, Suyun played his strongest card. He invoked the law of succession, ancient rules carved in stone long before Hana was born. The law was clear. An heir to the throne must marry within the noble bloodlines of Valora, or face challenge to their authority. It was designed to prevent exactly this situation, to ensure that the imperial line remained pure. You have a choice, princess, Suyun said. Renounce this human and accept marriage to Count Jiho, who has been approved by this council, or abdicate your claim to the throne. Those are your only options under law. Count Jiho stood and bowed to Hana. He was young for a nobleman, educated, handsome by Valoran standards. He would make an adequate emperor consort, politically useful and entirely forgettable. Hana had met him twice and remembered nothing about him except his carefully practiced smile. I request time to consider, Hana said, fighting to keep her voice steady. You have 3 days, Suyun replied. Then you must decide. The council adjourned. Hana returned to her chambers, feeling the weight of the empire crushing down on her. Minister Deho followed, unusually quiet. When they were alone, he finally spoke. You are going to choose him, are you not? Hana looked at her oldest advisor, this man who had served her father and now served her. Would that be so terrible? Yes, Deho said bluntly, because you would lose everything. Your throne, your power, your ability to protect your people. Suyun would become regent, and he would undo everything you have worked for. The peace treaties would die. The extremists would win. And if I choose duty, marry Jiho, give up Jiwan, live the rest of my life according to tradition. Then the empire survives. Billions of lives continue. Peace might still be achieved, eventually. Hana closed her eyes. What would you do, old friend? If you were me? Deho was silent for a long moment. Then he said, I would find another option. You are your father's daughter, clever and stubborn. There must be a third path. Meanwhile, the Terran government was dealing with its own crisis. Ambassador Yuna called an emergency meeting with Captain Minji and Ji-won. The meeting was not friendly. Do you have any idea what you have done? Yuna demanded. The political situation is a disaster. Half the Valoran Empire wants the princess to execute you. The other half wants to celebrate you. Earth is caught in the middle of an alien civil war because you could not maintain professional distance. Ji-won stood at attention, taking the verbal assault without reaction. Captain Minji looked like she wanted to say something but held her tongue. I am ordering you back to Earth, Yuna continued. Immediately. You will leave tonight on the next transport. We need to minimize the damage. I understand, Ambassador, Ji-won said quietly. Do you? Because from where I stand, you have jeopardized everything Earth has been working toward. We are the new species, the outsiders. We cannot afford to make enemies. And you have made the entire conservative faction of the Valoran Empire our enemy. Ji-won did not argue. What could he say? Yuna was right. He had let his feelings override his training, his duty, his common sense. He had fallen in love with an alien princess and created an interstellar incident, but he could not regret it. Even now, knowing the consequences, he could not regret loving Hana. The transport was scheduled to leave in 6 hours. Ji-won spent them packing his few possessions, writing reports, saying goodbye to the other Marines. Private Hyan hugged him, which was against regulations, but no one mentioned it. Sergeant Bowman shook his hand and told him he had done the right thing. That love mattered more than politics. 1 hour before departure, a message arrived. Princess Hana requested his presence in the gardens. Immediately, Ji-won should have refused. He should have stayed on base, avoided more scandal, left quietly like a good soldier. Instead, he went. Hana was waiting by the crystalline flowers, the same place where they had first talked, where he had first realized he was falling for her. She looked tired, her blue skin dull, her eyes red from crying. When she saw him, she smiled. But it did not reach her eyes. They are sending you away, she said. Yes, tonight. And I must choose between you and the throne. You should choose the throne, Ji-won said, the words tearing at him. Your people need you. Billions of lives depend on you. I am just one soldier. I am not worth an empire. Hana stepped close to him, taking his hands in hers. What if I told you I found a third option? What option? I am going to challenge the law of succession itself. Call for a grand council. Let every world in the empire vote on changing the law. It is risky. If I lose everything. But if I win, I can choose my own path. Ji-won stared at her. That is insane. You will be fighting 10,000 years of tradition. Yes, and I will need help. I will need Earth to stand with me, to show the Empire that humans are worth respecting. I will need you to convince your government to support me. Hana, they are already angry at me. I do not think I can convince anyone of anything right now. She smiled, and this time it was real. Then we will both fail spectacularly. But at least we will fail trying. I refuse to give you up without a fight. I refuse to let tradition dictate my life. My father spent his entire reign doing what was expected, and he died never knowing what it was to truly live. She pulled him close. I love you, Ji-won. I love your courage and your strength and your stubborn human refusal to surrender. You showed me what it means to fight for something beyond duty. Now I am going to fight for us. Ji-won kissed her, knowing it might be the last time. When they parted, he said, I will talk to Ambassador Yuna. I cannot promise anything, but I will try. That is all I ask. Ji-won returned to the embassy, and requested an urgent meeting with Yuna. The ambassador was not happy to see him, but she listened as he explained Hana's plan. When he finished, she sat back in her chair, studying him with calculating eyes. "This is a terrible idea," she said finally. "Yes, Ambassador, it will probably fail." "Yes, Ambassador. And if it succeeds, we will have completely changed the political structure of the most powerful empire in this sector." "Yes, Ambassador." Yuna smiled slightly. Earth has never been afraid of terrible ideas. Reaching for the stars was a terrible idea. Surviving nuclear war was impossible. Building a civilization from the ashes should not have worked. But we did it anyway. She stood, walking to the window that overlooked the embassy grounds, still scarred from battle. "I will contact Earth. I will recommend we support Princess Hana's proposal. I cannot guarantee the government will agree, but I will try." "Thank you, Ambassador." "Do not thank me yet. This is going to be the biggest gamble either of our worlds has ever taken." She turned back to him. "But perhaps that is what humanity does best. We gamble on impossible things and make them real." The next morning, Hana called a press conference. She stood before the galactic media and announced her plan. She would call for a Grand Council in 30 days. Every world in the Empire would vote on changing the law of succession. She was challenging 10,000 years of tradition, and she was doing it for love. The Empire erupted. Some called her brave. Some called her insane. Some called her a traitor. But everyone was talking, and in that conversation, change became possible. The Grand Council chamber had not been used in 300 years. It was enormous, designed to hold representatives from every world in the Valoran Empire. Hundreds of delegates filled the seats, each representing millions or billions of citizens. The air hummed with tension and possibility. History was being made. One way or another, Hana stood at the central podium, wearing the formal robes of her station. She had not slept well in weeks. The campaign to change the law of succession had consumed her life. Every waking moment spent convincing delegates, answering questions, defending her choice. Minister Deho had worked tirelessly at her side, using every political favor accumulated over decades of service. High Chancellor Su Yun sat in the opposition section, confident and calm. He had his own supporters, traditionalists, who believed the old ways were best. Count Jiho sat beside him, a reminder of the alternative Heil was rejecting. The galleries were packed with observers. Media from across the empire broadcast every moment. And in a place of honor near the front, the Terran delegation sat watching. Jiwon wore his dress uniform, his face carefully neutral, but Hana could see the tension in his shoulders. Beside him, Captain Minji and Ambassador Yuna represented Earth's official support. The vote would happen at the end of the session. But first, each side would present their case. Su Yun spoke first, his voice carrying through the ancient chamber. He spoke of tradition, of the wisdom of ancestors who had built an empire that lasted 10 millennia. He spoke of the dangers of change, of how empires that abandoned their foundations crumbled into dust. He spoke of duty, of sacrifice, of putting the needs of the many above the desires of one. It was a powerful speech, and Hana watched delegates nodding in agreement. Her stomach twisted with doubt. Perhaps this was foolish. Perhaps tradition existed for good reason. Then it was her turn. Hana walked to the podium slowly, letting the silence build. When she spoke, her voice was clear and strong. High Chancellor Su Yun speaks of tradition. I speak of truth. The truth is that our empire has grown stagnant. For 1,000 years, we have had no real challenges, no growth, no change. We have been secure in our power and our traditions. But security can become a prison. She gestured to the Terran delegation. 2 years ago, we met humanity. We dismissed them as primitives, barely worth noticing. Then 3 months ago, extremists attacked this very city, and we learned what humans truly are. Hana activated the display screens, showing footage from the embassy siege. Delegates watched as G1 and his Marines fought for 16 hours without surrender, defending not just themselves, but Valoran civilians trapped nearby. These primitives showed courage we have forgotten. They showed endurance we can barely comprehend. And when the battle ended, they showed mercy to their enemies. This is not weakness. This is strength of a kind we have never known. She paused, letting the images speak for themselves. I am asking you to change the law of succession, not to abandon tradition, but to embrace evolution. Our empire survived 10,000 years by being strong. But true strength is not rigid. True strength adapts. Hana looked directly at G1 as she spoke her next words. I love Corporal G1. I am not ashamed of this. He represents everything I want our empire to become. Brave, honest, willing to fight for what is right rather than what is easy. If we cannot evolve beyond ancient fears of outsiders, then perhaps we do not deserve to survive another 10,000 years. She turned back to the council. I am asking you to vote for change. Not just for me, but for every heir who comes after. Let them choose their own path. Let them marry for love or for politics or for any reason they choose. Trust that we have raised them well enough to make good decisions. And if we have not, then our problem is not the law, but our own failure as teachers. The chamber erupted in argument. Delegates shouted at each other, for and against. So Yoon called for order, but it took several minutes before the noise died down enough for voting to begin. The vote was electronic, each delegate making their choice privately. Results would be tallied instantly. Hana returned to her seat, her hand shaking. Minister Deho touched her shoulder gently, offering silent support. Before the results were announced, Ambassador Yuna requested permission to address the council. It was unusual, but Su Yun allowed it. The ambassador stood, and suddenly every eye was on the human delegation. I am not here to tell you how to vote, Yuna said, her voice accented but clear. That is your decision. But I want to tell you about Earth, about what we have learned through our struggles. She activated her own display, showing images of Earth, beautiful cities rising from scarred ground, forests growing where deserts had been, oceans recovering from acidification. This is what we almost lost. This is what we almost destroyed through rigid thinking, through refusing to change, through letting fear guide us instead of hope. The images shifted to show human history. Wars and disasters, yes, but also moments of triumph. Scientists working together across old national boundaries. Soldiers from former enemy nations serving side by side. Children being born in a world that had almost ended but chose to continue. We learned that survival requires change, Yuna continued. We learned that strength comes not from walls but from bridges. We learned that the most dangerous thing is not outsiders, but our own fear of them. She looked at Hana, then at Ji-won. Your princess fell in love with one of our soldiers. Some of you see this as weakness. I see it as the bravest thing she could do. She looked beyond species, beyond tradition, beyond fear, and saw a person worth loving. That is not weakness. That is the courage that builds lasting empires. Yuna bowed and returned to her seat. The chamber was silent. Then the vote results appeared on the main display. For changing the peace ascending law of succession, 1,247 votes. Against, 1,189 votes. The margin was thin, barely 60 votes, but it was enough. The law would change. Hana could choose her own consort. The empire had taken its first step into a new era. The chamber exploded in noise again, half celebrating, half protesting. But Hana barely heard it. She was looking at Ji-won, who who was looking back at her with an expression of pure joy. High Chancellor Su-Yun stood, calling for silence. When the noise died down, he spoke with surprising grace. "The Council has spoken. I disagree with this decision, but I accept it. That is what democracy means. The law will be changed." He bowed to Hana. "Congratulations, Your Highness. You have won." That night, there was a celebration in the palace gardens. Not a formal state event, but something smaller, more personal. Hana stood with Ji-won under the crystalline flowers, surrounded by friends and allies who had fought for this moment. Minister Daeho approached them, holding 2 glasses of Valoran wine. "I must admit, I did not think we would win. The votes were too close. But we did win," Hana said, taking a glass. "That is what matters. Yes, though I suspect the real work is just beginning. Changing a law is one thing. Changing minds takes longer." Captain Minji joined them, looking more relaxed than Hana had ever seen her. "Ambassador Yuna wants me to tell you that Earth's government has approved a formal alliance proposal. If Valora is interested." "Very interested," Hana said. "I think our peoples have much to teach each other." Over the next months, things moved quickly. Hana was formally crowned empress in a ceremony that broke several traditions and started new ones. Jaiwan stood beside her as imperial consort, the first human to hold such a position. Conservative factions grumbled but did not rebel. The vote had been legitimate, and most Valorans, even those who disagreed, respected the democratic process. Earth and Valora signed their alliance treaty, beginning joint military training exercises and cultural exchanges. Private Hyan transferred to Valora Prime to help establish a combined marine unit. Sergeant Bowman became an instructor, teaching Valoran soldiers human combat techniques. The 2 civilizations began the slow process of learning from each other. 1 year after the Grand Council vote, Hana and Ji-won stood on a palace balcony, watching a fleet of ships prepare to depart. The fleet was mixed, human vessels alongside Valoran cruisers, heading out on a joint exploration mission to the far reaches of the Empire. "Strange to think it has only been a year," Ji-won said, his hand wrapped around Hana's. "Feels like a lifetime." "Several lifetimes," Hana agreed. "Do you regret it? Giving up your life on Earth for this?" Ji-won pulled her closer. "I gave up nothing. I gained everything. A wife I love. A purpose beyond simple soldiering. A chance to help 2 civilizations become something better together. The Council still argues about whether I made the right choice. Let them argue. That is what councils do." Ji-won smiled. "Besides, I think we proved our point. Humans and Valorans working together defeated the extremists. Our alliance is already producing new technologies. And most importantly, we are happy." Hana leaned against him, watching the ships begin to move, their engines glowing in the darkness. "My father spent his entire reign maintaining tradition. I wonder what he would think of all this change. I think he would be proud. You did not destroy tradition. You evolved it. That is what good leaders do." The ships accelerated, vanishing into the night sky, carrying crews of humans and Valorans working side by side. It was a small thing, 1 fleet among thousands in the Empire. But it represented something larger. It represented possibility.